What is up, guys? So today we're going to talk about gangsters in prison. What are they like? How do they do their time? And when I talk about gangsters, I'm talking about like local thugs, like Brian Cockrell, Lee Duffy, those sort of people. And I'm going to talk about a couple what I met along the way. My hair's growing back. Not be long now before I can stop wearing this silly hat. I got butchered at the hairdressers. But yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about today. I've spent years in prison because you all know my story. I used to be a drug addict. Along with addiction comes stealing, because you constantly need money. So even when you get money, you're just buying drugs, so then you need more money, so it's never ending pit. You can't work because you're an addict. So I used to go shoplifting, stealing from offices. I'm not proud of this, it's part of my life though. That's why I talk about it. That's how I ended up spending years in prison. So yeah, gangsters in prison. Now, I've never really been that bothered about gangsters. You see them come onto the wing, like say a local celebrity who's been beating everyone up, knocking everyone out, bullying all the crackheads or whatever, selling drugs, and then they come into prison and you see all the little what do you call them? Little wannabes, they'll go running towards, what do you need, little, like people like Smoking Sheriff, those sort of people. And they'll be arse licking them. And one thing I did like about prison is you get to meet people that you wouldn't normally meet. You get to know people that you wouldn't normally associate with, because in prison, you're just another bare bum in the shower, everybody's the same. You all get the same privileges. There is a hierarchy. But that's what we'll talk about. But yeah, they'd come onto the wing, and me personally, gangsters, I've got no interest in gangsters. That doesn't impress me, beating people up, so if someone came onto the wing, I'd just be like, half of the people, I'd never even heard of them, because I used to be a drug addict, unless it was heroin or money, I weren't interested. But yeah, I'd see them come onto the wing, and I would like resonate more towards people that were struggling, like if a gangster comes onto the wing, I'm like, oh yeah, he's a gangster, is he? Great, don't care. But if someone else comes onto the wing who's like a small dude, maybe he's a homeless guy, it's his first time in prison and he's struggling, then I'll go and sit with him, and I'll talk to him and give him some advice. If they're in the cell all the time, I'll say, you're going to get in the shower, mate, come on. You need to get out of your cell more. And I would resonate more towards people like that. I find it way more interesting sitting, listening to some homeless guy who's been going through some real hard times and how he's overcome them or how he deals with it. I would find listening to them way more interesting to listening to, some gangster saying how many people he's knocked out this week. But that's just me. And a lot of the people back then, I'd never even heard of him. I remember the first time I saw Ronnie O'Sullivan. He was in Doncatraz, which used to be a Cat A prison when it first opened. And apparently his dad's doing life. And people said this to me last time I spoke about this, saying, Ronnie's never been locked up. I never said he was locked up. He came to the prison as a guest to play snooker. And there was like a snooker tournament on each wing. And if whoever won the tournament on that wing got to go down to the gym and play Ronnie O'Sullivan in a frame of snooker or whatever. And he was coming to the prisons. I think he went to a few different prisons for charity. And he came onto the wing, and I didn't know who he was. I'd never heard of him. And I walked past him. I'd come up for a visit. Everyone were locked up except me, because I'd just come from a visit. And he was just stood looking over, and I spoke to him. I thought he was like bored of visitors or something. And then I went to my cell, and then they let everybody out, and everybody like rushed over to him and his team, and they were all talking. And I said to my mate, I said, who's that? Because he just looked like a scruffy, scraggly hair. He had long, scraggly hair, long, greasy hair. And I said, who's that guy? And my mate said, it's Ronnie O'Sullivan. I said, Ronnie O'Sullivan, is it? I said, yeah. And I said, who's that? Like, no idea who he is. They say, he's a good snooker player, because this is years ago, before he like became one of the best snooker players of all time. And people were around him, and I didn't even know who he was. But yeah, he seemed all right. And it was the same with when I met one of the Gun brothers. Now, I'd never heard of the Guns either. and they are big, like gangsters from down Nottingham way. And I was on the wing, and there was my mate Danny O'Brien. He was a cleaner, this gun fella. It was one of the brothers, I don't know which. And he was a cleaner. My mate Danny O'Brien was a cleaner. And I said to Danny said to me, he said, "Oh, do you know who that is?" I said, "No, is it?" He says, "It's so and so gun. He's a big hitter down in Nottingham." And I know about him now because I've seen him on YouTube, but I didn't know who they were back then. So, and I remember why it stuck with me is because when I saw him, he looked like Jim the Anvil Neidhart from wrestling back in the 80s. And his name was Gun. So when I went past and saw his name on the thing, I thought, oh, fucking hell, I'm in prison. And there's a guy called Gun. And I just thought that was funny. So that's why I remember it. And I went up to him. And what I used to do is if I wanted to talk to someone, you know, I guess break the ice, I would say, "Oh, have you got a sweeping brush, mate? I can borrow." And I remember I asked him, I said, "Have you got a sweeping brush?" And he says, "Oh yeah." He says, "If you go over to my cell, number 6, there's one under bed, just go and grab it." So I says, "A nice one." So I've gone over thinking, he's alright, him, fucking gangster, you know, seems alright to me. And then I've got in the cell, I'm rummaging under the bed. And there's a bloke sat on a toilet, a big fat dude, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I looked up, I was shocked, you know what I mean? And then the wheels started turning, I'm thinking, this is not his cell, is it? And I was like, oh sorry mate, fucking hell, I'm in the wrong cell. And I thought to myself, "You fucking knobhead." So as I walked out, I looked over and him and Danny O'Brien were fucking belly laughing, and I was, "Fuck you cunts, man, you got me." You know, it was a good one, a good rib. So yeah, that's the time that I met one of the guns. I don't know which one it was, and another like big name what I met. And I know he gets a lot of stick online, and he's not like a top gangster or anything, but he has got a good big following on YouTube. He is well known on YouTube as Brett May, and he gets a lot of stick. You know, people because of that fight with the bare knuckle guy. I can't remember his name. And he went out in the first round, threw absolutely everything, and then he was knackered and he ended up quitting. So he gets a bit of stick for that. And people question whether he's the real deal. But I can tell you, Brett is a nutter. You know, that's how he lives his life. And that's why I find him like interesting. Because he's like the polar opposite of me. You know, he lives his life at 100 miles an hour. He's a big violent lump. And he doesn't care about anyone. And he's not like all these others where they're like, "Oh, I've changed my life now, I'm trying to help people." And then you go on their channel and ask them a question and they block you and call you a troll. It's like, just for asking a legit question. Whereas Brett's not like that, you know, he knows what he is, he's a big violent lump and he doesn't make no apologies. He's not trying to say he's a changed man, you know, he's if ever he gets in a beef with anyone, he puts his balaclava on, he's driving around. So yeah, he's an interesting dude. And the first time that I'd ever heard of him was in Doncaster, and he was a YO, and I was on the prison bus. We must have been going to court or something. And first time I heard him, he was really loud. He's like, "Oh, I'm from fucking Donny. I run that fucking wing." And I don't know if it was me or somebody asked him, "Who runs that wing? What you're on?" And he said, "I run that fucking wing." And he shouted, "Yeah, boys, who runs that wing?" And they're all doing, "You do, Brett." And I was sat at the back laughing my ass off. And I remember thinking, fucking hell, this guy, you know, he's loud, he's brash. And then we went to court and I never saw him. And then I went back onto the wing and I was on the survey. And one day the screw said, "Oh, make sure you save an extra meal, Paddy." It says, "We've got one coming up from the YOs. It's been starred up." And I was like, "Oh, that was interesting." Starred up is when there's like a YO under 21 young offender, and he's acting out all the time. You know, they can't control him. He's always getting into fights. So they end up putting them onto the adult wing to try and calm them down, and then they'll put a little star next to the name on the door tag, and that's what starred up is. It's usually just for like violent young offenders, and they said he's been starred up, and I said, "Who is it like?" And he says, "Oh, it's Brett May." I was like, "Fucking hell, I've heard of him." My mate Pio, he's dead now. He was telling me about him, you know, all these stories about him taking hostages and shit. I was like, wow. And as soon as he said that, I looked round to the lads on the survey. I said, "Hey, you want to watch this scene with him? I've heard he's a right nutter. He's a maniac." And then when I looked round, he was fucking right there. I was like, whoa. You know, I don't know if he heard me. That's why I'd love to do a podcast with Brett. He did reach out to me and say he'd do one with me, but I'd only just started the channel. You know, I wasn't really comfortable. But you know, when I start doing lives next year, maybe if he's out of prison, I would love to do one with him, because he is an interesting guy, and he's like the polar opposite of me. So I think that'd be like an interesting podcast or live or whatever. But yeah, that's the first time I met him. And then we used to go on a punch bag. There used to be a big punch bag on the corner of the wing, but you could only go on it if you had the boxing gloves, and there was only me and another kid who had boxing gloves. So I used to go on it every day. It's good training, you know. I used to love boxing training, and but you couldn't go on it, because if you went on it without the gloves, then, you know, if someone hits it, cuts the knuckle, gets blood on it, and then somebody else comes along, they hit it, they cut the knuckle and get blood on, you could get hepatitis. So out like that. So nobody was allowed on the punch bag unless you had the gloves, and only me and another kid had the gloves. So I used to go on there every day. I'd put the stereo in the corner and just go on the bag. And he came over. He actually had a broken hand from fighting, and but he had a little move around with us, you know. And he seemed all right. He seemed sound to me. And he wasn't as big back then as he is now. Now he's a big lump. He's got those big swollen steroid cheeks. You know, he wasn't that big back then. I don't remember seeing him and thinking, fucking hell, you're a big lad. He was about the same size as me. But yeah, he had a little move around on bag, and then we all got banged up. And the next morning he came over to us, and he was all flustered and angry. Oh, you fucking cellmate. My next door neighbour had music on all night. That's fucking beef. Like, I'm going to smash him. And I kind of like old manned him a bit, you know, like, dude, you don't need to beat everybody up, you know, just chill out and do your time. And that's all I can really remember about Brett. But yeah, I'd love to do a podcast with him and you know, ask him, can you remember the first time I met you? And ask him about getting started up and that sort of thing. But he does get a lot of stick online, you know. But everybody does, you know, even I get haters, and I'm not claiming to be nothing, but that's just life. But yeah, that's just a couple gangsters what I met along the way. What I've seen, like personally, with these gangsters are they come in and they're always, I'm not saying everybody, but most of them, the big names on the street. I remember one from Doncaster, a really big drug dealer. Obviously, I'm not going to name him, but he came in, and every time I've seen a big name gangster like that come in, they always seem to be really pally with the screws. They always seem to be out the cell all the time, on the phone. They always seem to get the best jobs. I don't know why. Maybe the reputation precedes them, but there is screws in prison who don't give a shit about none of that, you know, and tell them you get what we say you get. And that's when they start falling out and start being nasty, you know, when they don't. Because that's what they do. They're used to pushing people around and bullying people. So then when people, like when a screw, you know, authority stands up and says, no, you're not getting that, they don't like it. And that's when they start lashing out. But yeah, anyway, that's my take on gangsters in prison. I'm not really that interested in them. But I know there's loads of them on YouTube, and a lot of them, they've all like broke everybody's jaw, ran every wing they've been on, and drama sells, I suppose. But for me, I was never really that interested in gangsters. I would much rather go and see somebody who's struggling and listen to their story. But that's the video for today. If you like this video, press the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Nerf, pop.